during the 2019 bushfires, they told you that the fires there were unprecedented. Even though Australia had far bigger fires back in 83, at 75, 67, and for centuries prior, in the 1700s, Captain Cook's nickname for Australia was the continent of smoke. I wonder why. The only difference between then and now is that before, there were no cell phone cameras in the middle of the outback, so you didn't see it. Global wildfire activity is actually decreasing. It's only getting worse in the areas that practice aggressive fire suppression, like the American West. But few are eager to tell you the truth. Instead, they tell you the sky is falling like never before, and it's all the fault of our modern, shitty climate. When was the climate not shitty? Was there some magical time in history when droughts didn't exist? When do they think the ideal climate was? 30 years ago? Back in 1991? When the Oakland firestorm killed 25 people and destroyed nearly 3,000 homes and did $2.5 billion of damage in a day? Maybe the ideal climate was 100 years ago, when we didn't have all the pollution and power plants. Back in 1910, when the big blow-up burned 3 million acres across 2 countries in a weekend and killed 86 people? Or was the climate optimum even further back? Way back when the population of the Earth was less than 1 billion people. Less consumers, no SUVs, and hardly a whiff of CO2 in the air. Like in 1871, when the worst wildfire in recorded human history, the Peshtigo Fire, in Wisconsin burned over 1 million acres in a few hours and vaporized more than 2,000 people. They don't even know the death toll within plus or minus 1,000. And the people who fled for refuge in the Peshtigo River boiled alive. And that wasn't even the biggest fire that year. Hell, it wasn't even the biggest fire on that day. The same day, the Great Michigan Fire burned 3 million acres alone. In 2020, California had its biggest fire year in history, with people panicking over the consumption over 4 million acres of vegetation. But in 1871, those 2 fires alone burned more in a single day than California did in the entirety of its worst year. And neither of those 2 fires even have a place in history, because the Great Fire of Chicago ignited on the same damn day. 1871 was a hell of a year.
We'll do it live. Okay. No. We'll do it live. Fuck it. Do it live. I'll write it and we'll do it live. Thing sucks.
Welcome. Good evening, everybody. Now, that opening clip is going to be the theme of the show. And, unsurprisingly, it was kind of the theme of the show yesterday in a lot of ways, even though yesterday was all about not punching a hole in your drywall as government tells you that they're immune to every bad thing that they ever do. There's a recurring theme here. Yesterday, we opened our Sunday show with a little bit of biblical passage. And we talked about how there is nothing new under the sun. And we have all these cliches about this, history repeats itself, past is prologue. You have to learn your history or else you're condemned to repeat it. All of these are cliches for a reason. And I harp on this a lot because when you learn your fire history, it really is the skeleton key for understanding the next wildfire, because these things follow patterns all the time. Now, this is especially true with, the topic du jour, which is, of course, the Palisades Fire. Now, we have some new evidence that I just got today that gives us some clue into what happened on the Palisades Fire. And what it shows you may surprise you, or will it? KCK checking in. I love when you guys are in the chat, by the way. And Casey in particular, he pointed something out to me after the stream yesterday where we talked about Karen Bass's attorney's rebuttal to Alexander Robertson's lawsuit. And it was a very frustrating read, right? Casey pointed out that a part of the reason why nobody is stopping these foreign nationals from snatching up these properties for millions and millions of dollars is the mansion tax. And I didn't even think about that. Now, I thought about realtor commissions and how everybody's getting their beak wet. But the other thing that I didn't process was, yeah, you've got taxes in Southern California in particular, but all throughout California, where the higher the value of these properties, the bigger the tax bill. And I think there is actually an additional surcharge on top of traditional property tax if you're just rich or if you have an expensive home. So, man, we've just got so many perverse incentives. And that's going to be another thing that we're going to talk about throughout the evening. But one of the things that inspired tonight's live stream was a tweet from Edgar McGregor. You guys probably know him. He's awesome. He's a great follow. He does a lot of weather stuff. He does a lot of cleanups around Altadena. And he was instrumental in warning people during the outbreak of the Eaton fire. A lot of people, who just follow him on Facebook and Twitter for his weather posting, and he's always posting how he's doing cleanups. One of the reasons why I love them is he's actually out there doing something practical, right? That has a tangible impact on cleaning up our environment. Because in a lot of ways, I am a bleeding heart, liberal environmentalist. And what drives me crazy is people who will tweet about the environment, from the comfort of their apartment, but they never actually do anything about it. And it's always just nebulous stuff about climate and CO2, whereas you could be outside like Edgar and actually doing cleanups and making a big difference. Now, he warned everybody, not just during the fire, but also prior to the fire. I remember he posted a video where he was in Eaton Canyon warning about how overgrown and overdue the place was for fire. And then, man, I think it was just weeks later that you had the Eaton fire. Maybe it was a couple months. But Edgar, he posted this earlier today, and he asked, young climate movement, what did we do wrong? What did we do wrong? And this is in response to understanding that the younger generations are rejecting the sort of accepted narrative on climate change. They're not panicking about it. And in a lot of ways, they're just rejecting it entirely. And this is a question worth covering. And I like the way that Edgar asked this. What did we do wrong? Now, he is a big-time climate activist. And of course, he attributes a lot of the destruction of the fires to climate change. And I understand that a lot of people believe that, and I totally understand why they do believe that. And I was a big-time climate activist for most of my life. I was getting arrested at protests. I was one of those people. But I had an awakening, and where that came from may surprise you, or will it? So we are going to step into that minefield of climate change tonight, because we're going to prove that you can be adults and have a civil discussion about this stuff amongst people who have a high intellectual capacity for abstract thought. Okay. And it doesn't have to turn into some cult-like brawl, because, we're all on the same team here. We all want positive outcomes. And when we start with that premise, we can actually have productive discussions. Another thing that we're going to go over before we get to the new evidence from the Palisades fire is a throwback to an older time when the Los Angeles County Fire Department and the U.S. Forest Service used to treat you like an adult. And they actually wanted to empower you with an understanding of how to survive a wildfire. And so, dude, this is wild. Big shout out to Matthew Nauser for sending me this. This is an old document, I think from the 80s. And it actually gives you a step-by-step guide on how to survive an encroaching wildfire, as well as a lot of very valuable stuff on fire and watershed management at the Chaparral Urban Interface. And that is for sure the Malibu Palisades area. So we're going to dive into this later. I found this super interesting. You guys, I think, may find it interesting. But beyond that, there's just some good practical tips on how to not die in a wildfire, because it's shocking to me how many people live in fire country and they have no idea how to deal with it. They don't know what to do. They don't know if they should stay in their car, if they should get out. This should just be automatic information if you live in fire country. Now, before we get to all that, what is this new evidence from the Palisades fire? Now, you might be saying, we already know what started the Palisades fire. It was a rekindle. You might also be saying, how in the hell do you know it was a rekindle? How is that even possible? This is an image that I received today. Let's see if you guys are picking up what I was. What do you see in this image? Now, just for some background, this is an image, I believe on January 1st. So this is a few days before the Palisades fire and immediately after the Lockman fire. What stands out to you when you look at this image? Something jumps out to me right away. Right away. And I guarantee you that the ATF investigators who examined this site, although it was burned over at this point, but they also examined images like this. I don't know if they actually had this one. Something jumped out to them right away. If you guys aren't getting it, let me show you a second picture. I'll zoom this in for you. What jumps out at you right away about the Lockman fire? This is the day after it burned. It was an 8-acre fire on New Year's Eve. It was believed to have started with fireworks, and it was handled pretty efficiently by Los Angeles County Fire Department. But when I looked at this image, and now I've seen a bunch of other images that are similar to this, but this is the most close up that I've seen out of all of the images that I've seen of the Lockman fire. And the same things that jumped out to me in other images jumped out to me here, but this is even more dramatic. Who is picking up on what we're looking at and why this is such an important image? Nobody? My goodness, guys. Okay. Should I just give you, I'll just give you guys the answer. Fuck it. If you look at this, are there any firefighters in the chat who are looking at this? Let me ask you, does this fire look properly contained to you? Does this fire look properly contained? At this point, they called this fire out and contained. Does this look properly contained? Well, the answer is no, absolutely not. Right away, you have no clear line around this fire. You have unburned vegetation crawling over the fire line, the non-existent fire line, frankly. You can't have this. You cannot have vegetation going across the edge of your fire. Because why not? Well, because now you have unburned stuff sitting in hot stuff. Even though they've cooled it off, there is still a potential for a rekindle. And now you have this bridge of unburned fuel connecting this burn area to the unburned area. The unburned area is the stuff you don't want burning. So you cannot have it touching the burn area. You have to have a physical separation. They did not do that. And this is very obvious in this image where you see these branches with dry leaves still connected to their base outside the fire line. This is not a properly contained fire. Now, I've seen a lot of images like this, but this one was very interesting. And is that person walking past some dry vegetation on the fire line? Yep. Casey sees it. You cannot have vegetation on your fire line. That's not containment. So what is a rekindle, right? So just so we all know what we're talking about, what happened with this fire is, and this happens with a lot of chaparral fires, when they burn really hot, the fire will burn down into the root ball, okay? And it could be smoldering underground for quite some time. In fact, I remember when the Thomas fire hit, I think it was like a year later, they were still discovering smoldering ash pits with like massive amounts of timber in these deep jackpots that have been buried, and they were still smoldering a year later. Now, in this type of fuel model, you're not going to see things smoldering for a year, but could they smolder underground like a pig in a luau for 5 or 6 days? Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I had a widowmaker come down in our maple tree out in our backyard. So I bucked that up, put it into a burn pile. We do a lot of burns out here in Tennessee because it's America. It's a free state. And I've been having trouble trying to light this freaking thing on fire because we have a very low probability of ignition out here during the summer. It's very humid. And so this burn pile has been seasoning for like 2-3 weeks now. And it's like, I can dump gasoline on it. It will not light. I was finally able to get it to ignite today, and it was still tough. Daniel Firecopter chimes in. Yes, I was going to say there's no line around the fire. I drive by old burn scars on Gilman Springs Road in Riverside County. I always see dozer or hand lines around a fire. That is 100% correct. In order to call this contained, you have to have a physical line around the fire. Okay? So it's only in very rare circumstances in extreme terrain. Like if you're dealing with a very steep rock escarpment up in the Sierras, where you physically could not cut a line around some of that area. They will sit on that and they'll call it 99% contained for a long, long, long time until there's absolutely no heat, right? And they'll just monitor it, or they'll keep dumping water on it, or they'll say, there's snow on it. So you have to have a physical line around the fire. And anybody who's seen little brush fires, especially, an 8-acre one like this, they're going to have a scratch line around it. There's no scratch line here. It's just like tourists. These are Chinese tourists who are just cruising through the fire area, by the way. So it's like, this is a very vulnerable spot. This is really bizarre. It's really bizarre. Maybe it's just because, it was December, January, and people weren't fully staffed and they were just kind of, I don't know, rushing through it. I have no idea. But on a rekindle, so we're having trouble getting our pile burn to light in the backyard. Here's how we fix that. And I'll show you this. This gives you a little insight into what happens with a rekindle. Let me turn down the volume on this a little bit. So here's my burn pile. Now, part of it is burning okay. We're not getting very good consumption. Now, this portion on the left, you can see where it's sort of, there's no fire here. This part died out. So I use a leaf blower to get it going again, and I can rekindle it. Watch what happens. See how there's no fire there? But watch as that wind starts to take hold. You start to see things glowing. And then watch. You get a little heat on it, and then you just give it a little break. Now it's gone. Works like a charm. That is a rekindle in action. So now, this isn't necessarily like the most dramatic example of a zombie ignition, but this is precisely how it works, right? Once you get some wind on these smoldering things that look, at first glance, it looks totally out. And some of these smaller branches, there's no fire on them. There's no smoke coming off of them. But then once you get some wind on it, all of a sudden it'll flare up and then it's off to the races. And when you have vegetation hanging over your containment line like this, it's totally connected to this ocean of fuel on the outside. Ann and Alfie says, cold trail it on your hands and knees for any slop over spots. If you've ever seen mop up on a fire, it is very tedious work. It's not the kind of thing you just spray it down, call it a day, and you leave. They are mixing it in. They're mixing in that water with rakes, trying to make soup out of the soil because they know they have to get that water and that foam deep inside where it could still be smoldering, and then just a little bit of exposure to heavy winds, it can rekindle, right? So all of this stuff, this ash pit right here at the base of my burn pile, that's still hot. It's just like charcoals. It's not necessarily putting off smoke. Now, right, obviously I'm kicking up some ash as I'm blowing on it with the leaf blower, but that could still rekindle. There could still be some like charcoal chunks underneath that have enough heat residency that it's not enough to put off smoke, but you get some wind on it, it's going to take off. Okay. This is what happened. And we can see, to me, this is very clear. Guess what, guys? The ATF report on this very issue has been delayed yet again. Yet again. This does not mean that you are not going to get information from that report. Okay. You're just going to have to trust the people who are conveying the information from that report. All right. But just a little bit of nuance. I know I keep promising it, and I swear the feds they're trying to make me look like an asshole. But I probably wouldn't be showing you this stuff for no reason. All right. Now, on to climate change. Because I don't have enough trolls like posting 1-star reviews on my film just to punish me for talking about this stuff. By the way, you guys all need to go to Hotshot on IMDb and toss me a I won't ask you for a good review, just an honest review. Because sometimes when we talk about climate, you'll get some people who are legitimately in a cult who will go on there and they'll get mad at me for offering up a different perspective, and then they'll try to sabotage my career by giving me 1-star reviews. So it's on you guys to balance it out with some truth. Now, Edgar was asking this question. And I said it was a great question because it is a great question. What did the young climate movement do wrong to lose so many youngins? Well, it boils down to a few simple things. Number one, because I actually believe in answering this question, all right? And I'm going to do it honestly. Remember, I was a big-time climate activist my whole life. I remember seeing an inconvenient truth. I bought into it 100%. When I was graduating college at UCSB, where again, I was a barefoot hippie liberal guy, I fantasized about like opening up an eco retreat with solar panels and windmills, and it would be totally sustainable. And so I really thought that climate change was going to be an existential threat. And when I first got into wildfire, I fully expected that everything I was going to learn about wildfire would simply validate my perception of climate and fires. And it turned out to be the dead opposite. And it gave me a very different perspective. Now, any of you guys who know firefighters, you know that these guys do not give half a fuck about climate change. There might be a few, like crunchy guys in the Forest Service or some gals in the Pacific Northwest. But for the most part, none of them worry about climate change. Why? Because like we said before, there's nothing new under the sun. Now, they're not necessarily prone to panic anyway, but you never trust panic because it doesn't help, right? Now, let's talk about why is it that the climate movement is fizzling out? Why is it that it's fizzling out? It seemed like it was just, people couldn't talk about anything else in the media. Now, when I was coming up and I was getting arrested at protests and I was a big time activist, the thing that we would always say is that, well, you've got big oil. They're the reason why you have all this information that says that climate change isn't real because there's just too much money in big oil. There's too many financial incentives. Well, who's the richest person in the world right now? And what does he do? He makes electric cars and solar panels, right? He's trying to, like, the climate change narrative is actually the backbone of his entire operation. It's Elon Musk, of course. So that no longer works. We now have perverse financial incentives behind the climate change movement. But the big reason why I think this is starting to fail and people are doubting science, there's been a lot of like doubt of science over the last few years, because let's face it, man, science has been corrupted. It's been co-opted by perverse financial incentives. And now I don't think people trust anything anymore. And this isn't good. I don't celebrate that. Like, I like that people are thinking for themselves, but I can tell you, as someone who gets frustrated dealing with all the stupid conspiracy theories on wildfire, this isn't necessarily always a good thing, because some people are really fucking dumb. But here's the problem with the climate change movement. It is a cult. It is a cult. It has all the hallmarks of a cult. It has this invisible force that governs everything, but instead of God, it's CO2, right? They're constantly isolating people from other people's opinions, right? You say anything about climate change, you're not going to get published in a scientific journal. We even had trouble selling Hot Shot. I remember when we were pitching Hot Shot to Netflix, we got all the way to the top to their board of curators. And you have to get unanimous 6 votes. We got 4 out of 6 yes votes. And then 2, and I don't know who they were, but 2 people voted no because they didn't like the fact that we didn't really care about climate change in the film. Now, at that time, 2021, 2022, you're at a point where you cannot make a wildfire film without it being entirely about climate change. That has to be the predicate. That is just the reality. And so we had a hard time selling it. I told them that I wasn't going to change it because, in that opening scene in this live stream, that's the way I feel it's appropriate to discuss climate and wildfire. In that, to me, it's not relevant because we've had massive fires forever. And the only time that we didn't have massive fires, at least in the human interface, was when the natives were proactively burning everything every single year. Okay. And this was the point that I tried to make. I didn't try to, say, oh, climate change isn't real or climate doesn't have an impact on wildfires. It actually does. My whole point is it doesn't matter because, you take any year throughout history, throw me a year, and I will tell you about a fire that destroyed somebody's life. right? So that's why I go back in time. All right, when was the optimal climate? If CO2 is the control knob for wildfires, let's go back 30 years. Let's go back to the beginning before that hockey stick graph that you guys are always pointing out. Let's go back to, the early 20th century. Hell, let's go back to 1871. The fires that we had in 1871 would knock your socks off. Okay. So this idea if we could just go back to the pre-industrial era, if we could just go back to when CO2 was at, 220 parts per million, then we wouldn't have these big wildfires. It's bullshit. It's bullshit because there's nothing new under the sun. We've had big wildfires forever. The other aspect, the cult-like aspect of the climate change movement is blasphemy. You have blasphemy, right? There was a fired journalist. I won't say their name, nor will I say their gender, but everybody will probably be able to guess who it is who's in the wildfire world. Everybody hates them. Everybody hates them. Everybody, like I'm telling you, everybody. But they have some influence for some reason. And I remember when my film first came out, I was having some interaction on Twitter, and they were like, "Oh, he's a climate denier. I would just ignore him and block him." And this is the blasphemer line. You're a climate denier. If you don't constantly shit your pants about climate, you are a climate denier. Well, there's a reason for people not shitting their pants, and especially the older you get. This is part of why the climate cult preys on young people, because it's easy to believe in panic. It's easy to believe that you've got the end of the world coming when you haven't seen much of the world, right? If you have something like wildfires in Malibu that operate on a 25 to 30 year cycle, you see it for the first time, when you're in your 20s, you think, oh, the world's ending. When I was younger, these hills were always green and they just got browner and browner and browner. And then they exploded in this disastrous wildfire. And your dad, who's 60 years old, he's like, yeah, I used to think the same thing. And then I saw it again. I thought maybe this is a cycle. Maybe this is a pattern. And then your grandpa, who's 90 years old, he's seen it 3 times. He's like, just have a Coke and a smile. Shut the fuck up. This happens all the time, right? It's going to regrow and it's going to burn again. It's going to regrow. I'm sort of at that phase where I'm 41 years old. I've seen this a few times, and this is the other aspect of the cult. It's very much like a religious cult where you have these predictions of doomsday apocalypse that never come to pass. Right? You have these failed predictions of doomsday apocalypse that never come to pass. And what do? They never say we were wrong. They just move the goalposts. So it's like, you'll see this all the time. It's the end of snow. We're never going to see snow again. And it was like, I remember when this New York Times article came out where they're acting like we're never going to see snow again. And then there was a massive snowstorm in the Sierras. There's like record snow and all the ski resorts were totally full. They're always doing this too, right? We only have 3 years left till the end of the world. Well, how many times can you hit the snooze button on that? How many times can you hit the snooze button on we're 5 years away from the apocalypse? At a certain point, you see that enough times and it just stops resonating with you. And I'm sorry, you just can't do it. They always have these different countdowns. We have 12 years to limit climate change catastrophe, warns the UN. I like that there's a warning on this article that says this article is more than 6 years old. Like, oh, guys, you're halfway to the end of the world. Watch out. And notice this, climate crisis. This is a category in, The Guardian in the UK. Every single newspaper now has a climate desk. That means you have people in media whose entire job it is to tell you that climate is destroying the world. Now, if you were to, let's say, start with the premise that wildfires are the responsibility of climate change, and that's how I started when I first got into wildfire. But as I started operating around these firefighters, what I learned was, no, that's actually not the case. What it is fuel loading and more sources of ignition and people forcing us to fight fire where we don't want to, and fire suppression. You learn that, you realize, okay, this actually has nothing to do with climate change. Would you go and report that? If your entire salary and your entire department depends on there being a climate crisis, why would you ever report anything that would contradict that? Ever. So you have a perverse incentive. And so you always see this where they're constantly trying to link wildfires to climate. As soon as there's a wildfire, look at this. There's wildfires in Spain. And they say it's unlike any other kind of fear. Sustainable switch climate focus. Wildfires rage across southern Europe. Spain's Sanchez calls for a national climate pact as fires rage. What the fuck is that going to do? What is that going to do? Do you think that you are going to get enough solar panels and enough Teslas to make the weather less angry and the fires are going to stop? Spain gets wildfires. They've always gotten wildfires. It's only when we destroy our history that we start to believe this stuff. Now, you can't keep hitting this snooze button on we're 5 years away from the end of the world and expect people to continue to believe it. And the older you get, the less that works on you, because a lot of us are old enough to remember this.
Be hunger and death on a scale unprecedented in all of history. What scientists are telling us now is that the threat of an ice age is not as remote as they once thought.
Does this language sound familiar, by the way? The experts are telling us. Never seen before. It's unprecedented. But here they're talking about an ice age. Man, talk about a curveball.
During the lifetime of our grandchildren, Arctic cold and perpetual snow could turn most of the inhabitable portions of our planet into a polar desert.
In 1977, the worst winter in a century struck the United States. Arctic cold gripped the Midwest for weeks on end. Great blizzards paralyzed cities of the Northeast. One desperate night in Buffalo, 8 people froze to death in marooned cars. Pat Bushnell was on the road that night.
Traffic just absolutely stopped. I was afraid of being stuck in the car all night long with the cold and the wind running out of gas. And then what? I think that if we had to go through a real bad winter, just like we just went through, I think we'd have to think about moving someplace else.
Move where? The brutal Buffalo winter might become common all over the United States. Climate experts believe the next ice age is on its way. According to recent evidence, it could come sooner than anyone had expected. At weather stations in the far north, temperatures have been dropping for 30 years. Seacoasts, long free of summer ice, are now blocked year-round. According to some climatologists, within a lifetime, we might be living in the next.
All of that language sounds so familiar. To me, it's hilarious watching this stuff. And some people are adept enough to notice that for the longest time, we called it global warming. And then they started calling it climate change because they realized that they need to be able to put everything under this umbrella. And so if they limit themselves to warming, well, they can't blame everything on it. And this is another problem. When you attribute everything to climate change, okay, this is a big demerit because people start to get exhausted with this. It's like, if it's too hot, it's climate change. If it's too cold, it's climate change. If it's too dry, it's climate change. If it's too wet, it's climate change. If it's on fire, it's climate change. If it's not burning, it's climate change. It's always climate change. If it explains everything, then it explains nothing, right? This overindulgence in the climate emergency and just attributing absolutely everything to it, it's gotten so absurd that you'll see headlines where they're blaming obesity on climate change. Show childhood obesity because it's so hot, the kids aren't going outside. Guys, like imagine if I said that, if you don't clear your brush, you're going to have cardiovascular disease. Like, give me a break. Well, you get exercise when you go and clear your brush. So obesity is really the result of not clearing your brush. Like, if you want to convince people to clear their brush, just shoot it to them straight. Don't do all this extra bullshit that has nothing to do with it. It's so disingenuous and it's really bizarre. And frankly, it reeks of a weird kind of desperation. And most normal people would see right through that. KCK points out, back in like 1990, Ted Danson said the oceans would be dead in 10 years. This is just one of how many predictions have they had that didn't come true? And that was the thing. Like I said, when I first saw An Inconvenient Truth, I believed that everything that Al Gore was saying, including his predictions. But then you live long enough to see them get invalidated, right? He said New York was going to be underwater within 10 years. It wasn't. Florida was going to be underwater. All the ice, like the Arctic was going to be ice free. Now, of course, none of that happened. But here's the other thing. Why are we panicking over it in the first place? Even if the glaciers are melting, why are we panicking? Now, you don't have to be a climate scientist to understand that there's something wrong with this narrative. How do we know this? Well, you can make a tautological argument. What's this? An ancient Alaskan forest thaws from a melting glacial tomb. What does that tell you? You know, you don't have to be a scientist. What does this tell you? Just tautologically. If trees are thawing out from underneath a glacier, right? We're always panicking about glaciers melting, but what's underneath it? Now, I will remind you that Yellowstone itself used to be entombed under 3,000 feet of ice. There was a gigantic glacier that covered all of North America. And thank God, the planet warmed up, melted that stupid glacier, and revealed this geothermal wonderland, which started lighting up after the glacial retreat. So now, in this instance, glacial retreat wasn't a four-letter word. It wasn't a bad thing. Now, what we're seeing here, you've got another forest underneath the ice. That's correct, Daniel Firecopter. And what does that tell you? Tautologically, you don't have to be a scientist. You don't have to be a climate scientist, whatever that is, because, of course, that would incorporate like 30 different disciplines. Melting ice reveals remains of a 5,900-year-old log trees in Wyoming, uncovering a long-lost forest. What does that tell you immediately, without being a scientist? Tells you that it was much warmer before, right? Unprecedented is not a thing. There's nothing new under the sun, okay? If you have trees thawing out that are 5,900, they've been dead for 5,900 years. They've been buried under ice for 5,900 years. That tells you that at least 5,900 years ago, it was warm enough in this area to not have a glacier and to have trees. This is just tautological, okay? This is not, you don't even have to be a scientist. Now, when you go into this article, they still have this tick. Due to hotter temperatures related to human-caused climate change. They can't even accept the premise of what's happening here. They say the trees were recently exposed when the ice patch began melting due to hotter temperatures related to human-caused climate change. I swear, I feel every journalist in mainstream media is like threatened with a gun to their head. Like, you better say due to climate change at least twice in your article, no matter what the article is, right? If it's about kids getting cancer, you better say due to climate change somewhere in there. This is another thing. It's just, again, assigning everything to climate change, human-caused climate change. This weird tick, this feels like some kind of chant from a religious cult. Again, all of these traits that remind me of a religious cult. You isolate people from other opinions, right? So you're never going to publish anyone who's like a climate skeptic. You have blasphemy. You call them climate deniers. You establish like these untouchable leaders like Greta Thunberg. Like, oh, you can't criticize her. She's a child. You provide indulgences. That's another thing. It's sort of like a remnant of the old church, where it's like you've got Leonardo DiCaprio going to accept a climate award in his private jet. You have Barack Obama telling you about how the seas are going to rise and they're going to destroy us. And he's got beachfront property in Hawaii and in Martha's Vineyard. Bill Gates is the same. He's got beachfront property in Southern California. Why are they doing this? Normal people look at that and they think, okay, you're either a hypocrite or you're full of shit and you know it. Well, the answer is they know that it's not an emergency. They know this. They're just trying to sell it to you. And all of this stuff proves it. It's like this weird tick. And I don't understand. Like, if you're wondering why it is nobody believes this stuff, it's because of this. If you just treated people like adults and you had reasonable discussions, well, then people would actually listen to it. But when you say due to climate change, after everything, it feels like a weird religious cult thing, like some weird chant, you know? Yeah, Casey got it. Casey understands. If trees are thawing out under your glacier, that means it was warmer there before. Therefore, it was not unprecedented. I am going to hammer this home until I'm dead. There is nothing new under the sun. And I'm not trying to make this a religious argument, honestly. I'm just trying to point out the plain reality that you can never trust panic because history always repeats itself over and over and over again. Save California Hat says, pay to publish. If you run opposite of the money grab, you only get published on fringe websites and publications. This is actually true. You actually do have to pay to get published in like Science, the magazine. This is 100% true. Now, where are you going to get that money from? Again, like people, we used to always say this. It's like, oh man, it's big oil. It's big oil. Like, man, dude, the EV industry is outpacing that, right? And that's the other thing. When you see people making like tens, hundreds of millions of dollars off of this, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's corrupt, but it feels that way, right? When Al Gore has a mansion, and one of his mansions is actually not too far from us here in Tennessee, with 12 air conditioning units, and it's just one of his many homes, and then he's telling you that you can't live like that, and he's making tens of millions of dollars. It does not look good, right? You should probably live more monk-like. Ed Begley Jr. actually does that, right? So Ed Begley Jr. is the kind of climate activist who I actually kind of admire, because again, like, dude, I'm actually 100% for reducing carbon emissions, like 1,000% for that. And this is where people get confused. They think just because I don't buy into the alarmism and I reject this notion that CO2 is the control knob for wildfires, that they think I'm some kind of a denier or like I want to poison the environment. Here's the other thing you got to remember. All of the hotshots I know, who are mostly like pretty hardcore conservative Republicans, that's just kind of how they roll. They are more in touch with nature than any liberal I know, right? Any bleeding heart liberal climate activists, like I used to be for my whole life. These guys actually spend time out in nature. They are good stewards of the environment. They aren't just like showing up on the Angeles Crest, taking a selfie for Instagram, and then going back to their apartment in Santa Monica. These guys actually live out there. They clean up their trash. They hunt. They, dress their own animals. They cook them on campfires. Like, these are true salt of the earth environmentalists. And that to me is actually what I admire more than anything. Now, with this unprecedented thing, as if I haven't butchered it enough, I remember my first appearance on the Hot Shot Wake Up, which is a great podcast. You guys should all subscribe. I had this banger clip, and this ties into the Palisades and Malibu Canyon. Okay, this is important. I probably couldn't say it any better right now, so I'm just going to play this clip.
People don't understand what a healthy forest really should look like and what is required. But you're right, the media is making sure that people don't know that. The word unprecedented is the most butchered word in the modern language. You can see news articles of Malibu burning every 25 years in the second week of November, like fucking Old Faithful. But it's unprecedented when it happens right now. I don't even get into the climate debate because to me, it's not relevant. The solution is getting rid of fuels. That's it. You can't control the weather. You can't stop every ignition. And even if you could stop every ignition, dude, look what happened in 2020 for California. It was all lightning. That's the thing. If you think, oh man, we control our planet, we're going to stop every single ignition. God's going to come in, send a cloud, and send 10,000 down strikes in 24 hours and take care of it for you. Everything that can burn is going to burn. So it's like, you better get used to it and do it on your own terms. The way that we're doing it right now creates this learned helplessness. When you assign blame to everything but personal responsibility, taking care of your yard, clearing your brush, people just go, oh, there's nothing we can do. We're just victims of it. Like, I can't think of a more disempowering narrative. So it's like, dude, fuck getting in the weeds about climate, all this shit. Just take personal responsibility. Okay, let's say the climate is going nuclear. What are you going to do about it? No amount of Teslas is going to make the weather less angry. So just clear your brush and deal with it. That's how humans deal with everything in this environment. Adaptation.
No amount of Teslas is going to make the weather less angry. Now, I think, Casey, don't you have a Tesla? And that's the thing, is like, we have an EV. My wife has a Cadillac Lyriq, which, dude, we love that car. I love that car. 100%. I love this car. So whenever you hear me ragging on Teslas, my whole point is, you got to drive at 80,000 miles for it to catch up with an internal combustion engine. So it takes 10 years, just because like the amount of carbon emissions in the process of procuring that battery, it actually dumps like 10 years worth of driving emissions into the environment all at once. Then on a long enough timeline, or if you drive enough miles, then yeah, you catch up, and then it's superior to an ICE vehicle. But people don't recognize this part. My problem with the EVs is this sort of Rube Goldberg theory that if somehow we just buy enough luxury electric vehicles, that we're going to make the weather less angry and then the fires are going to stop. And it's just not going to happen. This brings us to how climate change actually did cause the Palisades to burn down. So after all that, after me shitting on climate change, here I am saying that, yes, actually climate change did cause the Palisades to burn down. How? Because of this. It is a disempowering narrative, right? When you tell people that it's because of the weather, it's because of CO2. When you say that it's unprecedented, we had unprecedented winds. We're getting a taste of that right now, right? The residents of the Palisades are getting a taste of this, where they have politicians who are responsible for protecting them, who grounded their aircraft inexplicably when they were getting hurricane force winds, when the winds were actually 38 miles per hour. So they love to tell you that something's unprecedented because it gets them off the hook. What it does is it removes their agency over the problem. And that is my biggest issue with this stuff. And this is 100% why climate change is responsible for the Palisades burning down. Not CO2, but the hysteria around climate change. And telling everybody that if you just put solar panels on your roof, if you get a Tesla, then you're going to make the weather less angry and then the fires will stop. So here you have people in the Palisades thinking that they're feeding the meter with the Tesla and they've got a power wall and they've got solar panels, but they've got brush growing up right on the side of their house. They've got vegetation all in their backyard and not the right kind of vegetation, right? So while they've been ignoring the real threat to their home, they're wasting their time on all this stuff that's not going to make a lick of difference. All because we've been programmed with this cult-like dogma about climate change. You need more solar panels, you need Teslas, and you're going to make the weather less angry. And then that's how we're going to get out of the wildfires. When you continue to blame all of the wildfires on climate stuff, this is what you're going to get. And it is a very disempowering narrative because it removes our agency. So then people are just like, oh, what are we going to do? We can't do anything about it. We can't get China to stop, pumping out emissions. So I guess we just have to accept that this is what we're going to deal with. I can't think of a more disempowering narrative, and I hate this. There is an opportunity cost. Like I said, you want to put up solar panels? Awesome. You want to get an electric car? We have an electric car. Don't have any illusions that you are feeding the meter on protecting yourself from wildfire. Because while you're spending time, money, and energy on doing those things, what are you not doing? You're not clearing your brush. If we told the truth about what's actually causing these fires or what's actually needed, if we stopped lying about things being unprecedented, you see those pictures in this clip? Those pictures of, we've got Richard Nixon on his roof in Bel Air. These old articles of Malibu burning. Richard Nixon on his roof, watering down his wood shingles. There is nothing new under the sun. And if we just told people the truth, then maybe they would spend their time doing things that would actually prevent their homes from burning down, rather than getting a Tesla, getting solar panels, getting a power wall, and then watching all of that burn down because they never got rid of the manzanita underneath their deck. This is 100% an issue. And I blame the climate change hysteria for the Palisades burning down because of the opportunity cost of misdirecting the public. Now, like I said in that clip, okay, let's just accept the premise that we are on this runaway train of warming. Let's deny the plain reality that in the last 5 or 6 fire seasons, we've had 3 very tiny fire seasons. 2019 was tiny, right? The last 2 years, 23, 24, tiny. No, 22, 23, tiny, right? The majority of our last 5 fire seasons have been small. That's the truth. But you'll only notice that everybody freaks out when the big fire seasons come. But when we have a small fire season, where are they? So it's only climate change when the fires are ripping. But climate change it went away. It went away in 2019 when we only had like 250,000 acres burn, or in 2022 when we only had 323,000 acres, 2 years in a row. These are years that we could have been putting prescribed fire on the ground. But no, here's another lie that we tell. When the stupid ass Forest Service chief, Randy Moore, a soil scientist, not an operator, when he banned nationwide, he banned prescribed fire. What was the excuse that he gave? Well, due to climate change. Our prescribed fires no longer work. They're just going to escape like they did in Hermit's Peak and Calf Canyon, which, by the way, was a rekindle, right? So the Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon fire, which ripped in New Mexico, that was cited as the impetus for banning prescribed fire nationwide. You know how it started? They had done a prescribed fire, and it was continuing to smolder underneath the snow all winter. And then when the snow melted, it was still smoldering in this underground root system for months and months and months. And then it rekindled. And then it burned, 300,000 plus acres, burned up a bunch of homes outside of Las Vegas, New Mexico. It happens. It happens. Happened on the Palisades Fire too. When we don't teach people about their history, we tell them that it's unprecedented. And the only reason for this is, it's because you don't have a Tesla. It's because of CO2. They don't learn this. And this is what pisses me off. The same governor, Newsom, who everybody hates, who's always talking about climate change, he published this document where they tell you prior to 1800, approximately 4.5 million acres of the state burned annually. 1800. Remember that clip that we played from my film at the beginning of this show, where I'm going back to 1871? Because everyone's trying to say, well, it's the post-industrial era. We've got too many emissions, and that's why we're having these fires. That's it? Really? Then why did we have giant fires way back then? Why did we have, before 1800, 4.5 million acres of the state burning annually? When 4.5 million acres burned in 2020, that was a catastrophe. It was a fire siege. It was the worst year in the history of California. That used to be routine every single year. So all of you people who are panicking over these fires, you never pay attention to the small fire seasons, and you never pay attention to this history back in 1800, way before the hockey stick graph, when you were burning 4.5 million acres a year. Never trust panic. There's nothing new under the sun. KCK, dude, he points out another really good point. And we talked about this in a live stream, I think it was like 4 shows ago, where I showed this webinar from the U.S. Forest Service, where they were talking about the benefits of prescribed fire, especially when it's combined with manual thinning of the forest, and how it will reduce wildfire activity like something like crazy, like 90%. Someone called in and said, I don't like that we're doing this thinning and then we're piling it up and burning because I'm worried about the carbon emissions from that. Casey says you can't do RX burning due to all that CO2 that would get put into the air. This is a concern that people have. This is a part of the reason why prescribed fire doesn't get done in a lot of areas, including around Altadena. People, number one, they're worried about the smoke, right? So it's not just the carbon emissions. They're worried about the smoke. They don't want to smell it. They don't want to see it. It makes them panic. And so then they tell the Forest Service to stop their burns. In the middle of the burn, they actually stopped the tan bark fuel break. They did 1 day of firing on that, and then they stopped. And then they announced that they stopped because weather went out of prescription. That's not true. That's a lie. The weather did not fall out of prescription on the tan bark firing operation, because I've talked to guys who were on that firing operation. They stopped because residents around the Altadena and Pasadena area, some wealthy, influential people said, we don't like seeing that smoke. And so they stopped it. And then they lied and they said that it was out of prescription. This idea that we're going to worry about the carbon emissions, dude, you cannot play whack-a-mole with carbon emissions, right? Remember when we talked about the indulgences portion of this cult, this religious cult that is the panic about climate change? Because look, I'm not gonna say that climate change is a myth. Obviously, the climate changes. We've got forests thawing out of glaciers, so of course the climate changes, and it's been way warmer before. Was that worse? Maybe it's way worse, but it probably wasn't. It probably wasn't. We have a 50-50 shot that things were better, right? Or they were worse back when it was warmer. I will say you get more extreme weather from cold. I'd much rather live in a warmer place than a colder place. That's the other thing. Whenever you never see pros and cons being discussed with climate change. It's only the cons. You notice that? This is another thing that kind of triggers me. On any discussion, you have pros and cons. Dude, you have people discussing the pros and cons of the fucking Holocaust now. But we can't discuss the pros and cons of climate change? Really? It's all cons. It's all bad. Every bad thing that ever happens is climate change. Oh, man. There's got to be some pros, like more arable land in northern latitudes, giving us a chance to like rotate crops or something and preserve some of the topsoil. But the thing is, obviously the climate changes. I'm not denying that. And I do think that humans have an influence on it. I think it's marginal. I don't think it's massive, but I do think it's significant because frankly, we apparently, I don't know if this is true or not. Maybe you guys can fact check me. Residents of Las Vegas have actually modified the climate in the desert there simply by forget carbon emissions, simply by having so many residential swimming pools and golf courses and casinos with massive pools. There are now big sources of water in the desert that didn't used to exist because it's all been trucked in, right? That is going to change the ecosystem in the same way that the lake behind our house changes our weather, right? Our weather on this side of the lake is way different from my buddy John's weather on the other side of the lake because that water presents a different thermodynamic, right? Apparently, they've changed the climate around Vegas where they're getting more rain. they're getting all kinds of different weather phenomena that they didn't used to get just because they've trucked in more water. So obviously, we have an impact. Having paving through tons of brush with asphalt has a huge impact on the climate, at least on the temperatures in that area. All that thermal mass and the change in albedo, right? The reflectivity of brush is so much different from dark asphalt. So you really think that if you pave a whole bunch of blacktop all over the place, that it's not going to change the temperature when it used to just be brush? Give me a break. What about solar panels? There was a study done actually outside of Palmdale at a solar facility where they were testing the heat residency of the different kinds of thermal mass. And so they were able to test three things in one area. So they had brush next to the facility. They had the asphalt of the parking lot to the facility, and then they had the solar array. The solar panels, they're black, they're very inefficient, so they absorb a ton of heat. So what they were looking at is how much did these things cool down at night? Like what was the thermal relaxation time of these different substrates, right? The brush, as soon as the sun went down, the brush cooled down, like 20-degree drop. The asphalt, it cooled down a lot more slowly, right? It was still warm to the touch, but eventually it got to a point where it was cool. The solar panels never cooled down, including the ground below the solar panels. They were still radiating heat nonstop all night. It was way hotter than even asphalt. And now you guys are putting these things all over your homes. You think that's going to change the temperatures? Probably. You think it's going to make it more difficult for you to cool down your home? So we're playing whack-a-mole with all this stuff. I have zero problem with solar panels. I would love to get some solar panels on my roof. Now, here in Tennessee, we have a lot of hydropower. So we have tons of clean energy here. So it's not even a concern. But I like the idea of being off-grid. That is the big value proposition of solar panels. But you should not have them in fire zones because when they burn up, you're getting all kinds of toxic stuff in the air. It's poisoning people and giving them cancer in a way that you can't even fathom. Now, all that said, guys, what I touched on in this clip was how the media is making sure that we don't understand this history. Media is making sure that people don't know this because they're always talking about unprecedented. So they don't learn their fire history. They don't learn anything about what can actually prevent these fires, how it can be mitigated. Instead, they're wasting their time chasing gophers, chasing phantoms, doing this Rube Goldberg way of stopping the fires where we're going to get Teslas and then we're going to make the weather less angry and then it's going to stop. The problem with this is it creates an uninformed public with no agency over their own lives. And it's almost like we're treating people like children. We are giving our politicians an out when we allow them to say things are unprecedented when they're not. They can tell you when you have 38-mile-per-hour winds in the Palisades, they'll say, well, we had hurricane force winds. It's unprecedented. We can't be held responsible for doing our jobs because, God, it's just the climate. You know, I would have loved to have saved your city. I just can't do it because, man, it's not my fault. It's the climate. We're just dealing. It's unprecedented. We just can't. It's the ultimate like get out of jail free card. You cannot give them this ground, right? So even if you are a hardcore climate activist and you believe this myth that things are unprecedented, or you just have a different timeline, right? You're just talking about the last 100 years and, you know, the medieval warm period doesn't matter to you. Don't give these people this out. You have to at least admit that the wildfire issue can be solved regardless of what the weather does, the wildfire issue can be solved if we properly manage the fuels around our communities and the fuels immediately around our homes, right? Can we at least agree on that? Good. Now that we agree on that, we can actually take action. We can stop wasting our time and spinning our wheels, and we can be productive and prevent the next catastrophe. And we can prevent people from dying in these wildfires. Now, the government used to do that. They used to do that. They do not do that anymore. Let me maximize this so you guys can see it. I love this. Again, big shout out to Matthew Nauser for sending me this. Good dude, great cinematographer. Ran into him on a bunch of fires back in the day. Yeah, he was making his own fire doc stuff. I cannot wait to see what he does because he's outstanding. But he pulled up this old Homeowner's Guide to Fire and Watershed Management at the Chaparral Urban Interface from the U.S. Forest Service in the county of Los Angeles, California. Now, a lot of this is, it's basic stuff. Man, this looks exactly like the closing shots in my film. Again, dude, nothing new under the sun. I cannot tell you how many times I've looked at old fire footage and I'm shocked at how it exactly matches the footage that I got like 40 years later. It's crazy. So a lot of this talks about the chaparral ecosystems, the native plants, herbaceous native plants and aerially seeded ryegrass cover the mountains again at the end of the rainy season after a fall fire. That's the other thing, man. These fires disappear so fast. Like the hills and the Palisades are already getting covered with new fuels. And it's quite beautiful. 5 years later, young woody plants have replaced their herbaceous species. At this stage, they do not carry fire readily. See, if you just have some fire every 10 years, 5 to 10 years, you're good. There's also a lot of interesting stuff about watershed management, right? And this is actually a good counterpoint from me, right? I'm always saying get rid of the chaparral. This is a good argument for keeping some of the chaparral because it stabilizes the hillsides. Okay, so this is good because sometimes I get a little too heavy-handed with my thoughts about fire protection. That's why my initial thought about, hey, we just got to clear out the fuels closest to our homes and then leave the rest in place, and then the Chaparral Society can have their big chunks of it. I think that is the way to go, right? Let's try to do both, right? Let's get some fire protection, but let's also try to leave as much of this ecosystem in place as possible because we have to consider the watershed and the landslides and stuff like that. Now, the most interesting part of this document, see, look at that fire ripping, dude. Anytime you think you've seen it all or this is the worst fire we've ever seen, I'm sorry. That was the cool thing about being around hotshots. It's like they've seen it all before. And so they don't really get too stirred up by this stuff. This teaches us a lot about thermodynamics and where you're vulnerable. This is all stuff that you don't see in the basic bitch stuff coming out from CAL FIRE, right? They're not showing you this stuff. But what I found most interesting, here, look at that. Look how this should be on our flame shame episodes. Look at how vulnerable this house is. But they talk to you about the boxed eaves that are going to help prevent embers from getting in your home, vents that are located near the roofline rather than the wall. That way, any flames that are creeping up the side of your wall, they're not going to shoot embers up into the inside of the attic, potentially covering your windows. If you have a pool, you should absolutely have a gas-driven pump because clearly Karen Bass is not required to provide water for firefighting. We found that out yesterday. So you got to rely on yourself. If you have a water source, you should be utilizing it. It also tells you what you should do to landscape properly around your home with stuff that's less flammable, that's going to provide equal root depth and strength. Drought tolerance, hillside landscaping, all of this stuff. Outstanding information that's not being conveyed. But I want to get to the most interesting parts. And it's down here in the deeper pages. This is where they really treat you like an adult. What to do when caught in a wildfire. This really stood out to me when I was reading this document because it's such a stark contrast to what we see today. So when we have a wildfire today, what do we say? Get out immediately. What does government tell you? Evacuate immediately. Get out. Get out. They always do this. Now, the problem is, let me give this disclaimer at the beginning, so that way I'm covered here. I'm not telling you to not heed the warnings of firefighters when they tell you to evacuate, right? You need to make your own decision. This is why it's important to read documents like this, so that way you can understand fire behavior and know what to do. A lot of people panic. They will get out of their car. You do not want to do that. Do not want to do that. Your car can take so much more heat than your skin can. Stay in your car as long as you can. But people don't know that. People live in fire country. They don't know simple things like this. What I will say is most of the fatalities that I saw on wildfires, people were in the process of evacuating. And some of those people, they were coming from places where they had a good safety zone, right? They either had like a park, a baseball field next to their home that they could have just camped out in. They would have been fine. But instead, because we're told just evacuate, just evacuate, just evacuate, they tried to drive down roads with zero visibility, with fire on both sides, smoke raking across. They drove off of a curve into a ravine, into a fiery ravine, and they died. This is very common. Evacuating is one of the most dangerous things you can do on a wildfire, okay? Again, remember the disclaimer. But notice the difference in how they used to talk to you, how government used to talk to you. If your home is threatened by wildfire, you may be contacted by a fire or law enforcement official and advised to evacuate. If you were not contacted in time to evacuate, or if you decide to stay with your home, notice that? They're not telling you you're a fucking idiot. They're just saying, look, if you decide you want to stay and defend your home, like Richard Nixon did in that clip, the following suggestions will increase your chances of safely and successfully defending your property. Here is the U.S. Forest Service and the LA County Fire Department telling you how you can successfully defend your property. I love it, man. I love this. I want to go back to this. Now, when the tick fire burned through my neighborhood back in 2019 with like 60-mile-per-hour winds ripping that thing, I did not evacuate. I used my press credential. I wasn't actually home at the time. So by the time I got there, they had already sealed off the area, but I had my press credentials, so I was able to get to my home. And I did not evacuate. I was going to stay and defend my home. Now, the thing is, I did all my brush clearance. I covered my gable vent in the back. I did that before every fire season. So I wasn't worried about my home in the first place, but I was worried about my neighbors because they did not do their brush clearance. They did not do any of those mitigating efforts. But I also had a pump. So I deployed my pump into my pool, had that primed and ready to go. I was going to stay and defend my home. I knew that it was going to be fine. I knew I had a good safety zone. We had a nice wide street. I was going to be fine. So I like this. I like where instead of telling people that your only option is evacuating, we're treating people like adults and giving them some agency and a bias for action. Now, what would help you successfully defend your home? Because if you don't have a ton of experience with this stuff, maybe you don't know. One, if you plan to stay, evacuate your pets and all family members who are not essential to protecting the home. I like that. So get grandma out, right? Get grandma out. That's good. 2, be properly dressed to survive the fire. Cotton fabrics are preferable to synthetics. Yeah, dude, polyester stuff, it will like melt to your skin and it will continue to like melt burn like napalm. Brutal. Wear long pants and boots. Carry with you for protection a long sleeve shirt or jacket, gloves, a handkerchief to shield the face, water to wet it, and goggles. See, that's a good thing. Sometimes there were like a couple times where I got caught up in a situation. I didn't have a mask, but I was just eating too much smoke. You just dip like a shirt in some water and put it over your face. It helps like cool some of the embers that might be coming into your face. But you don't want to be like waterboarding yourself. Number 3, remove combustible items from around the house. This includes lawn and poolside furniture, umbrellas, and tarp coverings. If they catch fire, the added heat could ignite your house. This was like the first thing that I did when I got back to my house during the tick fire. I immediately threw all my pool furniture and just shoved it into the pool because I had wood pool furniture. Now, I didn't have a bunch of stuff around my house that was flammable because, of course, I took that measure proactively and never allowed flammable stuff around the house. But those little things like the welcome mat, right? That's got some like fibers on it and some rubber. That was flammable. So I just tossed that in the pool. I just pushed all my pool furniture into the pool. I was like, I'll deal with it later. It's soaking wet. Nothing's going to happen to it. Number 4, close the outside attic, eave, and basement vents. This will eliminate the possibility of sparks blowing into hidden areas within the house. Close window shutters. Dude, just this alone will likely save your house. Just this alone. As long as you've cleared your gutters, you don't have a bunch of pine needles and leaf litter in your gutters, just closing that outside attic and that eave, the gable vent, that is like the most vulnerable spot. 5, place large plastic trash cans or buckets around the outside of the house and fill them with water. I like this. Soak burlap sacks, small rugs, large rags. They can be helpful in beating out burning embers or small fires. They're talking about as like, whacking it with a wet towel. It can absolutely work. There are firefighters in South Africa where they carry around these they're like rubber brooms almost. It's like a long stick with a flat rubber mat at the end, and they'll swat at it. It's really interesting to watch. They can be helpful in beating out burning embers or small fires. Inside the house, fill bathtubs, sinks, and other containers with water. Toilet tanks and water heaters are an important water reservoir. Again, remember, when things hit the fan, you will not have water. So get it going early. Make sure that you have sources of water for when Karen Bass fucks up and the water supply gets shut off. Number 6, locate garden hoses so they will reach any place on the house. Use the spray gun type nozzle adjusted to a spray. If you are not staying to defend your house, you should do number 6 anyway, before you leave. I have seen so many times that firefighters, when they show up, they will run into someone's backyard and just grab your garden hose. Because maybe they don't have enough time to deploy their hose. Maybe they are already committed to the house next door and they only have so many hoses that they can deploy. And so if there's just like a few embers in your gutter, they will grab your garden hose. If that's ready to go and it's sort of like pre-deployed and charged, bang, you're setting them up for success. If you have portable gasoline-powered pumps to take water from a swimming pool or tank, make sure they are operating and in place. 100%. Everyone who has a swimming pool, you should have one of these pumps. I think that costs like $3,000. So it's just a little bit of maintenance. It's just like a power washer. It's basically the same kind of engine behind it, right? And usually comes with like 200 feet of hose with a couple gated Ys. So you could run a hose lay around your property. It's relatively simple stuff. And again, honestly, if you are just leaving it there, if you don't feel comfortable defending your home, just leaving it there for the firefighters, it's going to set them up for success and it's going to give them a chance to defend your home. Place a ladder against the roof of the house opposite the side of the approaching fire. This is important. If you have a combustible roof, wet it down or turn on any roof sprinklers. Turn on any special fire sprinklers installed to add protection. Do not waste water. Waste can drain the entire water system quickly. Just soak it down, right? You don't want like a constant spray going, just soak it down. Number 9, back your car in the garage and roll up the car windows. This is good. You don't want embers getting in there. Disconnect the automatic garage door opener in case of power failure, which is likely. You could not remove the car. Close all garage doors. Place valuable papers and mementos inside the car in the garage for quick departure if necessary. Any pets still with you should also be put in the car. This was another thing that I did when the tick fire came through. I grabbed my dog and my pig and I threw them in my van. That's a sentence you don't hear every day. I grabbed my mini pig and I grabbed my dog and I threw him in the van. And then that's when I started pushing all our stuff into the pool, making sure that everything was buttoned up, had my fire hose primed and ready to go with the snorkel in the pool, had my hose lines charged. First thing I did was I put the animals inside the car. All this is good. I didn't have a garage, but I just figured, again, it's about getting out of there as quickly as you can. Close windows and doors of the house to prevent sparks from blowing inside. Close all doors inside the house to prevent draft. Open the damper on your fireplace to help stabilize outside-inside pressure, but close the fireplace screen so sparks will not ignite the room. Turn on a light in each room to make sure the house is more visible in heavy smoke. Turn off pilot lights. If you have time, take down your drapes and curtains. Close all Venetian blinds or non-combustible window coverings to reduce the amount of heat radiating into your home. This gives added safety in case the windows give way because of heat or wind. This is important. And this is another thing when it comes to your vehicle. Save California Hat says, actor Robert Patrick stayed back to defend his home after the Runyon Canyon ignition. Interesting story. You should get him on. I would love to have Robert Patrick on. I wonder if any of you know Robert Patrick and could maybe make that connection for me. I want to hear that story. But this part of closing all Venetian blinds or non-combustible window coverings, this is to block that radiant heat. Now, if any of you have driven through a wildfire, you know what this feels like, where you have your windows up, but you're shocked because it feels like, dude, it feels like I'm in a fucking oven. It doesn't feel like my windows are up at all, unless you have limo tint. There was a burnover in Santa Barbara County years ago where they discovered the importance of having window tint. There were 3 engines that got caught up. They went to what you maybe could call a safety zone. It was a dozer push out area. And the fire was burning over them in like multiple strips. And they were stuck in this burnover for like an hour. And I think 2 of the engines had tinted windows and one of the engines did not. Now, all the windshields are not tinted, right? So everybody got into the back of the engines and they deployed their fire shelter to try to block some of the radiant heat. But the fellas in the untinted vehicle got some pretty bad burns. The window tint actually stops a lot of radiant heat. Now, it should be obvious. I don't know why it's not, because we know that it blocks sunlight from getting in, blocks that heat. Why wouldn't it block fire heat? For some reason, we think it's different, but it's not. So if you live in fire country, it's probably a good idea to have, I had limo tint on my Jeep. So I noticed it helped a lot when I was driving through these fires and I had fire on both sides of the road. You could get burned pretty badly just from that radiant heat coming through the windows. Those windows are not going to offer you any significant heat protection. They will block embers, but you could get significant second-degree burns just from that heat coming through your windows. And in the case of in your home, you're probably going to want to take refuge inside your home. Oh, and here they even talk about it. When the fire approaches, as the fire front approaches, go inside the house. Stay calm. You are in control of the situation. Fuck yeah. I love this, man. I love the spirit of this. The difference between the way the government used to treat you back in the 80s versus now, they treat you like a fucking toddler now. They used to treat you like an adult. Look at this. Stay calm. You are in control of the situation. This is the dead opposite of where we're at now. We have no agency anymore. We're not in control of anything. Everything's unprecedented and everything's the climate just destroying everything, right? Well, back in the 80s, they said, fuck that. You're in control. As the fire front approaches, you go inside the house. Now, this actually is a firefighter tactic. I've seen this a bunch of times. When the fire front is pushing through, they're actually not supposed to be there. They're supposed to go and take refuge somewhere. If there's not defensible space, they're supposed to go and take refuge, wait for the fire front to burn through, and then come back and try to fight fire and save homes. That initial push through the brush actually goes relatively quickly. The homes burn a little bit later. It's usually after the fire front has passed that things start to ignite on the homes. I've seen firefighters go inside the structure, wait for that fire front to pass, and then come out. It's pretty interesting to watch because they know that the home can actually take a lot more heat than they can. And it's going to take a while for that thing to get fully involved. So they actually have a little bit of a buffer where, okay, you wait about a minute, that fire front passes through. And even if the eaves on the home are starting to catch fire, they'll be able to get out of there before the home is like completely involved. It's not like a tidal wave pushing through. After the fire passes, check the roof immediately. This is the most vulnerable part of the home. Extinguish any sparks or embers. Then check inside the attic for hidden burning sparks. If you have a fire, get your neighbors to help fight it. Because you know what? Your fucking neighbors are going to stay because they're in control too. God, I miss the 80s. The water in your pool and the water in your garbage cans, sinks, toilet tanks, etc. will come in handy now. For several hours after the fire, recheck for smoke and sparks throughout the house. See, we ain't leaving. We're going to stay all fucking night. We're going to stay all night and check for smokes. Remember, in a major conflagration, fire protection agencies will probably not have enough equipment and manpower to be at every home. I'm always telling you this. You cannot rely on government to save you. They are not going to be there when it counts. They might by accident, but there's not enough of them to cover every home. You cannot depend totally on their help. One of the firefighters' principal responsibilities is to stop the spread of fire from house to house. Therefore, if one home is on fire, firefighters might have to pass it by to save another in the path of the fire. A lot of people on the Palisades Fire were confused why firefighters were driving past their homes because they don't understand this, right? They have a different strategy. They're trying to stop the dominoes from falling. And so if yours is already involved, they've probably already red tagged it. Like, yeah, there's nothing we can do. We got to go and we only have so many resources. We only have so much water. Your careful planning and action during a fire can save your home. I love how empowering this is. Your careful planning and action. Not evacuating, not just waiting for shit to happen, but having a bias for action can save your home. I preach this all the time. Be prepared talk with your neighbors to see what resources you have, ask your fire or forestry personnel for professional advice and assistance. They should be offering this. They don't. So you have to be proactive. When caught in the open, this is good. When you are caught in the open, the best temporary shelter will be found where fuel is sparse. This should be automatic. These places could include road cuts and banks, large boulders, rock outcroppings, large logs, and depressions in the ground. Here are comments on some good and bad places to go. Now, just as a little bit of caution, you got to be a little careful with chutes and chimneys. When it comes to boulders, sometimes they can actually channel fire in through an opening and make it way worse. So certain boulder formations can be a little sketched. We've learned this the hard way on some fires. Now, automobile, move the car to bare ground or sparse fuel areas. Sparse should be none. It should be dirt or a road, right? Because grass can burn you. Close all windows and doors, lie on the floor and cover yourself with a jacket or blanket. The fuel tank of the car will normally not explode until the car is well on fire or may not explode at all. So keep calm and let the fire pass. Like I said, your car can take way more heat than you can. They're telling you to get on the floor for a reason. Remember, that radiant heat coming through the windows is not going to be stopped by the windows. You are going to get major burns on your body if you are anywhere near those windows. It's going to be like a fucking oven. Road cut. If caught without shelter along a road, lie face down along the road cut or the ditch on the uphill side. Less fuel and less convection heat. Cover yourself with anything that will shield you from the heat of the fire. Try to get your face down into a little pocket. Like if you're in dirt, if you can dig out just like a little bit of a divot where it's like an air pocket where you can keep your face sealed off. One of the issues with, and this is what firefighters are doing inside those shelters, right? If you don't have a fire shelter, you're going to have to deal with it. But one of the issues isn't necessarily that they are burning alive so much as they're going to breathe in superheated gases. And it's going to blister their lungs and they're going to end up drowning in their own blood. So one of the things that you want to try to make sure is that you are not breathing those superheated gases. So if you ever caught, God forbid, in this kind of a situation where you have to endure a burnover, you want to try to set yourself up for success. See if you can hold your breath, okay? Obviously, you're not going to be able to hold your breath for the entire time. So if you can create a pocket that's sealed off from those superheated gases where you have just enough air to survive, if you're able to dig out just a little bit, you have to resist this temptation to try to get that gulp of clean air. You're not going to get it. And it's just going to rush in and bake you like a potato. Chimneys. Never be caught by fire in natural chimneys. These are narrow, steep canyons that concentrate heat and updraft. That's what I was talking about. Temperatures may exceed several thousand degrees Fahrenheit during a fire. If you're in this situation, you are not surviving it, right? Not surviving it. Saddles. While hiking out of an area where fire is in progress, avoid topographic saddles if possible. Saddles are wide, natural paths for fire winds, right? Saddle like this, fire winds are going to get channeled down into that. Vegetation here will normally ignite first. In the open, look for areas with sparse fuel. For example, soft chaparral such as black sage or grassland rather than chamise chaparral. If possible, you guys aren't going to be able to identify the difference. Just look for like the lightest fuels possible. If possible, within a depression. Clear as much fuel as you can while the fire is approaching. Right? If you can get to bare mineral soil, that's ideal. This is why you should always just have like a tool in your car, like a shovel or a rake, right? In case you need to emergency rake your forest. Clear as much fuel as you can while the fire is approaching and then lie face down in the depression. Cover yourself with anything that will shield you from the heat. Smoke may create as great a survival problem as the flames do. If you are caught on a steep mountaintop or sharp ridge, the backside or fire leeward side will provide more safety. All right, so like imagine you got a hill here, you're on this road here. That's the lee side. On a mountaintop or a sharp ridge like this, fire's coming up this way, that's the lee side. This is where you want to be. Be aware, however, that fire eddies often curl over ridges. The fire will slop over. Like if you get to a situation like this, where you're running up this hill, you're trying to outrun the fire, and you can get to the other side, I would just keep going. Keep going. And just fucking ass over tea kettle, try to get to the bottom of the hill and get out of there. Storm King Mountain? That fatality fire, one of the survivors, everyone was trying to run uphill to outrun the fire. A lot of them didn't make it. One guy made it, but just barely. As he was coming over the peak, he was screaming out of both pain and terror. The fire front was right on his heels. He jumps over to the lee side. The fire's just like barking up this way. He managed to survive, continued down the hill. The doctors told him, because he did have some burns because that thing was licking his back, right? If he hadn't have been screaming as he did that, he would have died because he was exhaling so forcefully, he did not breathe in the superheated gases. If he had been inhaling as he did that, he would have died. Just remember that. Before hiking in fire-prone areas, seek additional advice from wildland firefighting agencies. They may supply pamphlets and give you specific tips for wildland fire survival. One of those things would be potentially lighting an escape fire. Was it the Man Gulch fire when that was first discovered by non-natives? If you got fire coming at you, if you are able to light off the hillside in front of you and that burns off enough fuel, then you can go into that black and you've provided yourself a little safety area. It's dicey, but as a last resort, you could do it. In summary, stay calm. You are in control of the situation. If you decide to stay with your home during a wildfire, evacuate all family members who are not essential to protecting the home. Dress properly to shield yourself from the heat and flames. Take steps to prepare your home for the approaching fire. As the fire approaches, move inside, stay until it has passed. Move outside, survey the situation, take action, and help neighbors. Caught in the open, seek shelter where fuel is sparse. I love this so much. I will post this. Yeah, Ken was saying there was a single dude that outran the fire on Storm King, and that's what he did. Yep. Sorry, there's a little delay with the comments. So I got to that part too quickly. I love this document so much. It makes me so nostalgic for a time where government actually treated you like an adult and they gave you some agency over the problem. It is the exact opposite now. They're not saying don't evacuate. They're saying evacuate the women and children, evacuate grandma if they're not essential to helping you defend your home. But again, all of this is centered around, hey, defend your home. Defend your home. Be like Dick, right? Remember that shot of Tricky Dick? He stayed and defended his home. He was on his roof, spraying it down. Look at Tricky Dick. And look how he's dressed, too. We got to get back to this. He's hosing down the roof of his home in Bel Air as the wildfire is approaching. He's got a freaking tie on. I was at the airport recently, and it's like, we just dress like slobs, dude. We're all wearing sweatpants. And, I'm guilty of this too. We got to start having a bit more class. Not making any comments about Tricky Dick as a person, but we got to get back to dressing like this. And we got to get back to talking to each other like fucking adults, like LA County used to with this. Stay calm. You are in control of the situation. We have the exact opposite mentality now. You are not in control of the situation. Evacuate. Let government do all the work. Government's not going to save you guys. I would encourage you all to learn more about wildfire. So that way you can feel empowered to stay and defend your home. Ken says, if you dress too well, people shun you. Is this true? Do people shun you if you dress nicely? Do they think that you're like some pompous asshole if you dress nicely? I mean, here I am wearing my Meow Talica shirt, so I'm one to talk. But it's just you and I. It's just a live stream. If I go to the airport, I'm going to put on a suit and tie. Doggone it. We need to bring that back. And we need to bring back like government talking to us like adults and having this more cooperative process. Because as we learned on last night's stream, where we saw Karen Bass's rebuttal, the demurrers to Alexander Robertson's lawsuit, they don't have a duty to protect you. They don't have a duty to actually fight fire, even though you pay for it. They're not obligated to do it, and they're not going to. And they're going to let you down when it's most critical, right? So, and I'm not talking about the LAFD. These guys are rad. They're doing the best that they can. But if they're hamstrung by their overhead because they don't have enough budget for enough trucks, That's not their fault, right? So government is going to let you down. You need to stay and defend your own home if you can. And the route to getting to that point is learning about wildfire, understanding how it works. I will post the link to this document so you guys can all read it, because there's nothing new under the sun, everything in this document still applies. All of it, like quite literally all of it. And this is what's so frustrating for me. We don't need fancy technology to understand wildfire. And if we would just learn from history, we could manage this stuff better. That's what's so frustrating, man. This is why I hate it when people use the word unprecedented, because it quite literally erases history. It tells you there is no history to this. But if we actually read our history, we would understand this stuff better, and we'd have a chance for survival, right? You'd have a chance for defending your home. And I guarantee you, a lot of people could have defended their homes in the Palisades if they hadn't left. But since the first impulse is, no, get out immediately. Dude, we got to be more grown up than that. How valuable would the 10s and 18s be in the hands of regular people? Yes. This is the 10 standard firefighting orders and the 18 watchouts. This is going to be in your incident resource pocket guide. Okay. The IRPG, which is basically the manual for wildland firefighting. There are 18 watchouts. You know what, Ken? You just inspired me. Maybe that's going to be our next episode. We will go over the 10s and 18s. Ken, God bless you, man. You just gave me the idea for the next show. So now that we've gone over this document on how to defend your home, in order to understand whether or not you are able to defend your home, you have to understand wildfire behavior better. Okay. And so on the next episode, thanks to Ken, we are going to bring you the 10s and 18s that all wildland firefighters have to memorize. They need to be able to recite all of these, because this is going to inform what they are required to do and what they need to watch out for, right? The watch outs indicate when you're in danger. So it's important that everybody in fire country learn this stuff so you can know when it is safe or not safe to try to protect your property. And like I said, when the tick fire hit, I stayed and defended my property. Not only did I say I wasn't there when it hit, I went in to make sure I could defend my property because I knew that I could, because I knew where I was safe. I had the confidence that I could be there. And if shit went sideways, I knew where I could go. There was an area, basically is like a cul-de-sac, where I knew I was going to be totally fine. I knew I was going to be totally fine. It might get hairy, but I knew that I would be able to survive. So you guys, I want to see everybody in fire country set up for this success. I like the way that they used to do this. And this is a much more grown-up way of cooperating with civilians in the wildland interface. And we've lost that. So I'll post the link to this. And then on our next episode, we'll go over the 10s and 18s. Ken is posting some good information in the comment section, by the way. You can download an app called Wildland, and it has a wealth of information. Everybody who lives in fire country, you should learn this stuff. This isn't about LARPing or trying to be a firefighter. Like, I never tried to do that. I wore what I had to wear just to make sure that I was safe. But like, everyone should understand their environment and should feel empowered. Like this document was saying, like, you are in control. Stay calm. I cannot tell you how empowering it is to learn about wildfire and understand fire behavior. Whenever I was out there, the confidence that you get when you know what a safety zone is, it is so empowering and gives you so much more confidence, and you don't panic. Panic is not a fun feeling. That's why we need to eliminate it entirely, right? If you could eliminate one thing from your life, it should be panic. This is why I hate the climate change stuff, because it's all panic. It's all fucking panic. I'm not saying disregard the environment. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be reducing CO2. I'm just saying stop fucking panicking and stop pissing on my leg and telling me that it's raining, right? Stop telling me things are unprecedented when we know that there's no such thing. There's no such thing. There's trees that are thawing under glaciers. How did they get there? If this is unprecedented, how the fuck did those trees get there? Obviously, it was a lot warmer before and for a very long time. These are big ass trees. They were there for a long time. So clearly that area was ice free. So if it gets ice free again, is it really the end of the world? Of course not. Let's stop panicking. The only thing worth panicking about, frankly, at this point is AI. And what do we know, folks? How do we separate ourselves from AI? Got to do it live. So until next time, you guys do it live.